Daniel, what an absolute pleasure to have you on. How
It's
are
great
you?
to hear. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. Well, hey, look, I mean, it's great that Luke's kind of done all the easy stuff. I'm keen to just kind of dig into things. So, look, I am really excited for this discussion, in part because obviously for those who maybe didn't know, I used to be at Uber. And was kind of in the early days in the ride hailing, but then I watched Uber Eats in the very early days getting built, and that was so I'm really excited because I've seen the potential for micromobility with Uber Eats, and I'm keen to kind of dig into that with you. So, look, I think probably the easiest place is if we start off. Can you just sort of take us through to Uber, like for folks who are sort of maybe coming to this and don't quite understand the scale of the business, because I think a lot has changed in the last year. If you just want to sort of take us through like where we were a year ago, where we are now, just in the sort of overall operations and global, et cetera, et cetera.
Certainly, yeah. It's been an absolutely incredible year for Uber Eats, and I think the whole world has changed so much. So this will probably mean more to you as someone who was at Uber yourself, but the delivery business today is as big as the mobility business was in 2017. Yeah. So what's really happened is that delivery has shifted from being a luxury to, at times like this, really being a utility. It's a core part of how we live our lives. And it's a trend that I don't think is just going to be a blip on the radar during times like COVID, which we're all hoping will end as quickly as possible. But that I think that this has introduced a new type of engagement for people, a new way of living that I think will last beyond the pandemic. And so what we're trying to figure out is what is the right role for delivery in our communities, in our lives, for merchants that in the past have really had their businesses transformed even long before COVID, where e-commerce was affecting merchants and retail in a massive way. And so now actually this is causing us to rethink cities and rethink our role in cities. So very apropos to what you're talking about today. Today, we now have over 500,000 restaurant partners on Uber Eats in 6,000 cities across 6 continents around the world. So it's really incredible that now Uber Eats is really a part of our lives around the world and plays a bigger role in the work that merchants do than it ever has before. We are number 1 or number 2 in over 25 markets, including the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, France, Mexico. Each of these markets operates in a different way. Each of these markets has their own unique ways of shaping cities. Mobility operates in a different way across each of these markets. Micromobility plays a different role in each of these markets. So it's a really, really dynamic world. And for us, what we've seen is that our growth has been over 135% over the last year in delivery. And in some markets, you take a place like New York, we've grown over 150% year over year. So it's a really, really dynamic market. And for me as a product person, a really dynamic use case. So that's what's exciting to us. And there's a lot more that I'm sure we're going to go into here.
Yeah, totally. Well, like I guess the part that I'm really curious about. So you're head of product, and I mean this is obviously a micromobility conference. So when you're thinking about product, how has micromobility, like where do you see micromobility fitting into this? Because I mean we'll kind of start there, and then we can kind of dig down because there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. But I'd love to sort of start at the broad, kind of the top level there.
Yeah, well, what's interesting to me is that even though the what we would call as a product people, the use case of delivery has exploded, and you can see a trajectory that's very, very predictable almost at this point. Like this is just going to become a more and more mainstream thing. It's the classic trajectory that we see from niche or emerging product to mainstream core use case. The bit that's less predictable here is how the goods actually will move around. In the US, the vast majority of couriers are using cars today. And certainly with our division of our splits between urban and suburban, cars play an enormous role. New York is actually an interesting exception where most of the couriers are what we call two-wheel. So they're either on bikes or scooters or motorcycles or walking. In fact, it's just a core part of the dynamic there. Now, as soon as you leave the US, it almost flips on its head. And nearly all of the deliveries are being done by people on scooters or bikes or motorcycles. So the forms of transportation are already varied. And this affects everything in how we work. This means that we need to be aware of how big an order is, how big the items are. We need to make sure that we send the right orders to the right couriers who are able to actually process those orders. And we also, more and more, what you'll find is that couriers are actually delivering more than one thing at a time. They're actually serving multiple orders at a time. And so our technology needs to be hyper aware of those differences. And so what's going to happen is we introduce new types of mobility, new types of delivery mechanisms, new types of vehicles, is that we will need to be more and more aware, not only of the preferences of that courier and what the kinds of jobs they're interested in doing, but also the capacities that they have, given the technologies that they're using.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's, as we think about sort of the vehicle type, the part that I was most excited about when I originally was sitting with the team who were setting up Uber Eats in New Zealand was we were onboarding a lot of our courier supply, similar to the US, and a lot of that was coming across from the rides business. So it was a lot of people with cars. And the thing that kind of blew us away was how quickly a lot of that shifted to people on mopeds, and then very quickly, soon after that, people on e-bikes. And like, if you look at Australia, for example, like Australia is just, there's a huge number of people who have gone and rented e-bikes. And actually that's where Zumo started. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about Zumo and that kind of, the people who are renting e-bikes into that space. But from a product perspective, if you're thinking about it, like, I get you about the sort of hyper matching, that sort of thing. But like, is there an aspect about micromobility in terms of cost that you think makes it more beneficial, or is that something that's interesting for you? How do you think about that from a product perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's an ecosystem and it's a marketplace. And so when we think about what success looks like, we think about three types of customers on the platform today. We think about those folks who are placing orders, consumers. We think about earners on the platform, couriers largely, and we think about merchants. And whatever changes we make need to serve all three of those customer groups really, really well, which means that any new technology that comes up needs to solve a problem that those customers are experiencing. So with consumers, their primary aim is to get high quality product as quickly as possible at a great price. And so insofar as micromobility can solve speed oriented problems, that's very, very interesting for consumers. With couriers, they want better ways to earn. They want to earn more flexibly. In fact, everything that Uber has stood for with earners has been flexibility. And so that's tended to be flexibility in time. I think what you're talking about now is that the modality becomes flexible as well. So that means, are there types of vehicles or capabilities that we can put in the hands of couriers that enable them to process more orders, to do it more effectively, to do it more efficiently? That's very, very interesting to them. And then finally, merchants actually play an interesting role here as well. What you've started to see that is a different dynamic than we ever saw before is with delivery playing a bigger and bigger role, you have a lot of couriers queued up at restaurants as orders are coming together and orders are being processed. And so if there's technology that can be built to simplify that or to make it smoother, especially as we start seeing dine-in coexist again with delivery, the art form will be in making those two work symbiotically for a merchant, rather than feeling like they're competing with each other or somehow hurting the ambiance or otherwise. So that's where micromobility has an opportunity to deliver real value. But what I would say is, as always, you need to start with the customer problems. And those are the kinds of problems that those customers need to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the big one as well around parking, which is obviously, that can be a huge problem, especially at a sort of a tradition when you're kind of transitioning a restaurant where you've got a kind of food production business that has existed as a restaurant and it has a certain amount of car parking or not, in that case, and then you're moving to, hey, we're going to move to a delivery business and we need to have this facilitation, as you say.
Okay.
Yeah, well, look, there's another part of this as well. If I kind of want to go a little bit broader, as well, I'm conscious that we don't have quite as much time as we had originally scheduled. So, but I'm curious about, we just had Jeanette City Khan on this morning, talking about 15-minute cities and how this is sort of all the vogue and, and she was saying, look, the reality is we're going to have to rezone and remake our cities around this concept of a 15-minute city, and everything's walkable within 15 minutes. But I remember when I was at Uber, and Travis, bless his soul, back in the day, was making the argument that, like, man, don't worry, Uber Eats is going to mean that we don't even need to have kitchens. So like, how do you think about it when you're going from the sort of um, people are going to live where they're going to live, but also at the same time we're shifting to on demand. But the kind of overall, this narrative is we're going to be shifting towards a 15-minute city. Do you think 15 minutes is sort of like it's a harking back to an era that doesn't exist anymore, and we're going to move to on demand, and this is how the world's going to be going forward?
I miss going to restaurants. I miss seeing people out and about. My heart bleeds when I see merchants with boarded up storefronts right now. So I don't think that the future, the best future, is one where we disconnect from the merchants. I think that the best future is one where we reconnect with each other and with merchants. And I think, if anything, what COVID has taught us is that merchants play an enormously important role in our communities. And whether you're in a suburb or a big city, whether you tend to walk down the street past the merchants near you, or whether you tend to drive, the change that's happened has not been positive. It's been painful. And we want, in a post-COVID world, to restore that sense of community and connectedness with each other and with merchants. So really, our strategy on Uber Eats has been to be the way that we provide instant access to local commerce. So speed is an element of it, but delivery is going to play an enormous role in it. Pickup will also play an enormous role in it. You'll also start seeing us build more and more technologies that make dine-in work really well. So there's a food hall actually in the UK that you can actually go and order for dine-in. You can literally order using Uber Eats, and you can pay using Uber Eats. And so it makes the menu and the group ordering experience just a little bit slicker. But the goal is not to disconnect people from the merchants near them. It's quite the contrary. It's to connect people with the merchants. And that's why we see the future as Uber Eats playing a role in being a daily use case for people. If we can create instant access to local commerce, that goes well beyond food delivery. People tend to order food 1 or 2 times a week as a food delivery scenario. Pickup is going to make that a bigger and bigger experience, more frequent experience. Grocery is something that people engage with usually once a week, but they actually build their cart throughout the week. So there's an opportunity there to create more frequency for people. And then all other types of merchants are going to ultimately be on our platform, and we will create that connection for people with those merchants. We're also doing more and more to enable the merchant to reach out to users and actually experience the kind of know who your regulars are in a way that your merchants used to do in a face-to-face world. So all of this is to say that, yes, the 15-minute city is an interesting and compelling North Star. The idea that some people may not rely on their kitchens to the point where they actually don't need one is a cool aspiration, I think, that forces us to think beyond how we operate today. But the idea that we are connected with the merchants in our community has never been more important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, you mentioned that you're, the grocery and delivery. So, I mean, I know that you're thinking about getting into that space, and that there had been experiments in that space. Can you just talk through what that might start to look like? So, obviously, you're shifting from just restaurants to actually like a whole slew of different people. A whole just slew of different options and ways to deliver things.
Absolutely. So grocery is no longer a science fair experiment for us. This is real. We have tons of merchants on the platform now, doing everything from kind of top-up type of convenience to full grocery baskets. If in the US, it's in a small number of cities and is expanding very, very quickly as we bring more merchant on the platform. So you can literally go in and place a full grocery order and it'll arrive within the hour, and just as you would with food delivery. It's now a global and very, very real part of what Uber Eats does. We're also experimenting with prescriptions, and actually just brought prescriptions to New York City today. So that's that happened literally today, which is really, really exciting, because again, it's the kind of thing where a delivery and instant access type of use case is really, really valuable to people. You will end up seeing, and these exist on the platform today in different markets, toy stores, florists, butchers, all manner of merchants on the platform. And what brings it all together, crucially, is the membership program. It's Eats Pass and it's Uber Pass. And what that does is it eliminates the barrier to using delivery as frequently as people intend to use it. When you eliminate the delivery fee, people feel like they can actually order in an uninhibited way from the merchants around them. And so what that means now is if you're in New York, for example, as of today, you can actually use the membership to power food, prepared food, grocery, prescriptions, ultimately also mobility. So this will also, the same membership also now is useful for getting discounts on rides. So we bring it all together with the Uber Pass, and that's a really, really important part of the strategy going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Sort of Amazon Prime equivalent, you know.
It's faster. We operate in minutes.
Yeah. Well, and I totally get it. This is the thing that I think is really interesting, right? Is that, you know, in some ways they were able to leverage their scale, and then when you think about it, you were obviously leveraging your scale, but you still need to be able to drive down that cost of delivery. And this is in part kind of why I'm asking. You know, I think micromobility, when you look at it, I had Mina Nada, who's the CEO of Zumo, and Zumo they lend e-bikes to or rent e-bikes to folks. And the key point he was saying is that, look, if you look at the overall delivery options, like by far e-bikes are the cheapest. They're you know, they don't have the licensing requirements. You don't have any of the other things. We can maintain them and we can keep them up to speed. And so that allows you on the other side to then say, look, from a delivery perspective, we know that we can increase the efficiency because they're faster for parking, and then also as well the vehicles themselves are cheaper to run. Curious, because that, in some ways, to me, that's what you need to be able to do, is just drive down the marginal cost for each of these deliveries so that you can, for example, leverage and make it a more kind of a sustaining ecosystem. The one thing I haven't seen, and I'm curious about, is sidewalk delivery robots, or because I know obviously you had the drone experiment. I was at the Uber Elevate, or I was watching the Uber Elevate Summit, got very excited about drone delivery, and then of course that's kind of fizzled out. But you know, has that been looked at? What's the kind of the thinking inside of the company at the moment around that?
For sure, yeah. All of these delivery technologies are interesting to us, so we're keeping an eye on all of them, and the robots or sidewalk delivery are an important aspect of that. It's a little bit early days, if I'm honest, to fully adopt a technology like that. I started our conversation today by sharing some of the key customer problems that we're looking to solve. Pickups are hard. Delivering to high rises in cities is hard. There's a lot of complexity that couriers have to deal with in terms of finding their way through the building, finding the right apartment, or finding the right drop-off spot. So those are the kinds of things where I'd like to see the technology evolve a little bit more to solve some of those key problems. And I think it's a little bit early in that today. So it's interesting, it's compelling. We're continuing to look at it. My kind of request to the companies and those who are innovating in that space is to make sure that we look not just at cost reduction, but actually look at the complexities that happen in pickup and drop off in particular. And a little bit of what I was talking about with the merchants and the complexities of having delivery happen alongside dine-in, those kinds of complexities need to be addressed for this to be a truly compelling technology for us to adopt. But there's no question that in the future, we'll be seeing more e-bikes, we'll be seeing more types of modalities, we'll probably be seeing some sidewalk robots and sidewalk deliveries be done as well.
Yeah, so this is great. I wanted to lead into this as well, which is the as you say, we will get into those areas of in terms of the vehicles and the capability and technologies. But we have entrepreneurs on this call and in this conference who are building vehicles now. And one of the wonderful things about micromobility generally is that it's pretty modular. Like you know that this is our thesis around micromobility, is that, look, these are almost like, this is the early days of the smartphones or the early days of computers. You're taking all these pieces and putting them together into kind of, we've got a Cambrian explosion of new mode types. I'm very excited about things like the Arcimoto, you know, the sort of the larger Deliverator vehicle and things like that. What if you were thinking about it, you know, where do you think the opportunities lie, and what do you think are the opportunity? Yeah, where do you think the opportunities lie is probably the best way to start.
I think that if you look at the lens through which we assess quality and evaluate these kinds of ideas, it's essentially around reliability, speed, dependability. That we averaged less than 30-minute delivery time over the last year, and that's incredible. That kind of dependability is what gives customers the confidence to order again and again and again. Eats was literally the #1 most downloaded food delivery app last year, and I don't think we can continue that trajectory just by adding new use cases. I think that it sits on a foundation of people knowing that when they order, the food comes through, it comes hot if it's ice cream, it comes cold, and that kind of reliability is really important. So I would say that making sure that we address the biggest pain points. Pickup time is a huge portion of the overall trip time today is spent at the pickup location. Often it's because the food's not ready when the order is meant to be picked up and the courier arrives, or because of the complexities of finding parking or finding your way into the restaurant itself. It's not always curbside. So solving for those in a very reliable and scalable way is really important. Drop-off is the other biggest area of friction for all the reasons I just explained around finding the customer, finding the drop-off location, finding your way through buildings. So those are the things that we're going to look at as kind of the key success indicators. And if these new technologies can deliver on those in a predictable way, where it achieves it for a large enough portion of trips, it doesn't have to solve all the problems all at once, but if it can achieve it for a large enough portion of trips right out of the gates, then it becomes a compelling thing for us to integrate. I'd say the last thing is the world is going to be a hybrid of these technologies for a long time. So these technologies need to sit neatly alongside couriers doing other deliveries. And in an ideal world, you could even see a world where the more automated technologies actually help couriers execute what they do in a more efficient way, so that these are not competing with each other so much as actually creating a symbiotic outcome that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the, as we think about the vehicle aspect, so I hear you about the reliability. The one thing that I didn't hear you say was capacity. And is that a kind of key driver? Do you think about that? Like what do you want to see in that space?
Absolutely. I think capacity will be more and more important as we broaden out more from food delivery. With food delivery, there's a certain point where you've put so many orders in at once that they have no hope of arriving at the customer while still hot. And so the being able to batch, we call it batching, 15, 20 orders may be useful for corporate orders, which aren't as big right now when everybody's working from home, but won't be as useful for normal typical orders from households. Now, the moment you weave into it prescriptions or groceries, where the timeliness component is less important, an hour or 2 hours might be fine for some of those orders, then capacity becomes a more interesting part of the story. Obviously, at that point, you need to kind of both solve this at the merchant side, where you actually have enough merchants close enough to each other so that the pickups are happening in close proximity, and then fan out to all the customers. But I do think that as we broaden out more from food delivery, the capacity component will play a bigger role.
Yeah. Your point around proximity is something that I think about a lot, because in some ways, right, you look at like new technologies have come through, they've remade how we think about cities. Like if you look at Jeanette City Khan, again, mentioning this morning, which I love, is this idea that most of the cities in the US were built during the era of the automobile, so we've built our infrastructure to be relatively sprawling, and you look at places around the world, it's like, we can see that the technology that was the predominant form of transport actually is the thing that drives how we build our planning and where we build our proximity. The thing that I can see that's happening with on-demand is that we're starting to aggregate all that proximity together again, because we want to be able to batch things out. How do you see the impact of on-demand impacting how we think about zoning going forward?
Well, if you're a new merchant today and you expect that a large portion of your business will be done through delivery, and you're trying to decide where to position yourself in the city, there's a very real question you're going to be asking yourself. Is the most optimal place to position your restaurant on a main street which is oriented toward browsing and shopping? Or is it more logical to position yourself elsewhere, which is perhaps more optimized for where delivery will happen, or where you might have a parking lot, or where you might be near a freeway on-ramp in order to expand your delivery radius? And that's a very real question folks are asking themselves. Now, anybody who would have opened a restaurant in the last year obviously would have optimized more for delivery. As we get back to a world where we see more of a hybrid for merchants, where it's a combination, I think you're going to start seeing a return to main streets as the optimal place. But I also think you're going to start seeing restaurants get much more clever about dividing up their work, where you'll have a portion of their kitchen be in a place that's optimized for delivery, perhaps not in the city center, and a portion be done in city center, focused much more on customers that are doing dine-in. So I think this is going to be a real hybrid. And I think we're going to see it change very, very quickly, because once you introduce delivery at the pace that we've now been doing it, it is no longer just an afterthought. It is actually, businesses are starting to form their mentality around this.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Well, look, I'm conscious that we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'd love to just ask, you've got an audience of this is our VIPs. They're people who are in the industry and thinking about micromobility. If you were in this industry, what would you want them to be thinking about in terms of you and the sort of very rapidly growing area of delivery?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things come to mind. First and foremost is anything that today has traditionally been done manually, or in a world where you'd expect to step out of the house and browse and shop, or anything where you would have had a connection with a merchant. You always like to see that particular bakery because you know the people that are there. That cannot go away. Society needs that. And so think not just about how to automate existing engagements, but also how to create and continue to preserve that connection with merchants and with community. Because ultimately, and this is why our strategy is so focused on instant access to local commerce, that every word in that sentence matters, and local is an incredibly important part of it. The second piece that I would say is, whether you think that a particular type of good is benefits from instant access or not, the future is instant. There's no question about it. You might not have thought that you needed that iPhone delivered to you within 20 minutes of when you placed the order, but the moment you've experienced that, you will never again be satisfied with anything slower than 20 minutes for that, which means that we need to not just look at food delivery or groceries, but we need to actually solve for some of the harder examples: hardware stores, pet food that's quite large and heavy, all of the inconvenience scenarios that don't fit as neatly into today's delivery paradigm will absolutely be part of people's expectations around instant access. And so we need to position ourselves for that. We need to prepare for that future.
Yeah, awesome, excellent. Hey, well, look, I'm conscious that you need to run, so I'm going to end it up here. But look, it's been fantastic to have you. I really appreciate it, and it's a joy to kind of talk about this stuff with you, because I know I certainly think about it a lot, and I know you do as well. So look, thank you so much. I wish you all the best, and I'm really excited to follow on and hopefully have you back again when we get back to in person and we can do this in the Bay Area.
Looking forward to it. Thanks very much for having me.